Why are Spurs like watching a different team? They're like a mystery gift grab bag. You have to pull your hand in and pull something out. It could be a turd, it could be a block of goal, but you got zero idea.
I think it's probably a mixture, isn't it, between the fact that the players are elite but not the absolute kind of world-beating, top-of-the-class players, but also it's because the way that Ange plays needs everything to click.
We back! Like Dominic Solanke. Oh, what a weekend of action. Borderline October surprise come early November. Manchester City, shocked. Arsenal, flail. Liverpool, losing at half-time. But Seagulls strike back their way to the top of the table. Southampton, yes. You finally get a big boy win. Of course you do. You were playing Everton. Oh, and Nottingham Forest are as hot as the Rizzler. Throw in that there was also very little VAR intrigue in any game, which is perhaps the most wondrous thing of all. This weekend had more shocking scenes, to be honest, than your average Halloween slasher movie. And to break it all down, thrills me no end to welcome back the man who'd be my VP pick if I ever ran for president, though God help whatever country that would be for. It's the Jonathan Wiseman of football at your New York Times. Straight out of Harrogate, it's Mr. Rory Smith.
How you doing?
Oh, Roy, it's so bloody good to see you. I've got to say, you fill me with joy in a way I need it in my life right now. Can I ask you this? We've just survived October, and I don't know what it's like in England, but right now, pretty well 97% of the United States smells vaguely of pumpkin spice. And when I was a kid, Halloween did not exist in England. It was not a thing. There was a rare English holiday, Guy Fawkes Day, that I won't get into, but it was like fireworks and stuff. But I was just back in England. There was like pumpkin spice Halloween Chardonnay in the liquor store. I know a lot of people think it's still an American holiday, but I do know it's increasingly popular. Where do you stand on this?
I'm pro Halloween. Although not as pro Halloween as I am pro Bonfire Night. Bonfire Night is my favourite night of the year. Something else, it's November the 5th, something else is happening around the world on that night. But for me, that is Bonfire Night, and that is sacrosanct. Halloween is now a thing. People are slightly resentful of it. Older generations, Rog, I would say, are slightly resentful of the American influence. We don't like American stuff, but we do consume it endlessly. But my son is an avid trick-or-treater. Although the change from when I was a kid, because we definitely went trick-or-treating, so that'd be 35 years ago. Yeah, definitely.
Like for Halloween, or were you just like beating up kids for candy? Because we did that happened in Liverpool, but there was no Halloween. That was just 365 days a year.
So we trick-or-treated for Halloween, and then on November the 4th, we had something called Mischief Night. Did you have that in Liverpool?
Every night was Mischief Night.
Every night
Come
was
at
Mischief
me
Night.
a bit harder, bro.
In Yorkshire, one night a year was designated as Mischief Night. And Mischief Night was trick-or-treat without the treats, without the candy, without the excuse. It was just a night that you went out and caused trouble. But we definitely trick-or-treated. The difference now is that there's a whole symbology of whether you want to be involved. So in much the same way as people who are into swinging put pampas grass outside their house to let other swingers know that maybe, there might be some action.
What? Hold on.
That's true. Did you not know that?
What are we talking about? This is like known in England that if you are swinging, children listening, just fast forward for one quick moment. If you're swinging, that's your sign to the world. Like pampas grass, the plant with the plumy plant.
Yeah, the tall sort of plumy grass. Apparently, if you have that outside your house, that is interpreted by swingers as a sign that like-minded folk inhabit that house.
So if you just happen to live in a state where it's like an invasive plant, like in Hawaii, California, Florida.
I mean, I presume it's different in the States. I don't know what plant you'd put outside in the States to let people know you're swinging. But it's in Britain, where pampas grass is not a naturally occurring thing, then that is the symbol by all accounts. It is not something that graces my front garden, Rog. I want to make that clear.
This is amazing. By the way, dear listeners who are listening, either get some, or if you do have some and you've just realised it was an error, I think in America it's White Rocks is like the story. That's the equivalent. But go on, where are you going? By the way, where are you going with this? Yeah, we've gone deep. So pampas grass, swingers love Halloween.
No, so pampas grass signifies to other swingers that you're into swinging.
Yeah.
If you put a pumpkin on your doorstep in Britain, that means you are willing to receive trick-or-treaters, that you've got candy in for them to take. And the difference from when I was a kid is that now, when I take my son out, the houses that don't have pumpkins outside, we just ignore. You just walk past them, you just sort of say, right, there's no pumpkin there, mate. Go to next door.
There's no tricking that.
There's no tricking at all. Whereas when I was a kid, if you knocked on the house and they said, "Oh, we don't have any sweets," that was the trick element of trick or treat. So although I am pro Halloween, I am anti the removal of the trick element. I feel as though without the trick element, it is just children begging for sweets.
God, children who ring on a house that has a pumpkin and pampas grass.
Oh, it's a dangerous world. You don't know what you're going to get.
I just Googled what pampas grass looks like, and I'm looking out my window of my studio, and I realised we've got to do this podcast quickly. I've got some very quick gardening to do afterwards. some very quick...
What you have to question there, Roger, is who planted it?
A very, very horny gardener, I think. But you know what? I've never said this with more joy. We do have to get to the football. First, two quick things. First of all, Kansas City. I am coming to your magical kingdom, and not just to eat all your burnt ends. We'll be in your town for a live show ahead of the NWSL final, November the 21st, live on stage. Sam Lewis, the great Sammy Banana, and I will host a women's game night of 1,000 stars, presented by our friends at Allied Bank. We'll be at the Madrid Theatre Thursday, November 21st. Tickets are available now. You'll find the link in our show notes, either on the podcast or under the YouTube. Come and be with us. Let's raise a glass. Well, I hope this will become an annual tradition at the final game. Let's never take a moment of watching football together for granted. Secondly, I want to raise a third first Michelob Ultra of the day to the act of voting, which I did early this weekend. My second time voting in a presidential election in the United States. And I have to say, it is such a moving, profound, it's an honour. It really is to vote in this nation that I grew up revering from afar as a kid, to cast my lot in with my fellow Americans. The lines were actually huge. The energy was like no other. And if anyone voted, I'm sure you're nodding. It is such a profoundly emotional act to do this. I took my youngest kid, Ozzy, along with me. Poor bastard. This kid has spent a weekend bookended by the agony of watching Everton wilt impotently, and then finish off with the Bears surrendering without clenching so much as a fist on Sunday night. But to share that one moment with him of voting as an American was one that I will always treasure. America, hope you enjoy the freedom to vote as much or even more than I did, and may allowing me to become a citizen be the low point in our nation's history. Onwards from here. When I vote, I do think of the line from Langston Hughes that I used as the epigraph from my memoir, "Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be." Raw. By the way, is the election even breaking through in England, or you're just like, it can't get a look in with the huge news about the 5 tons of cheddar cheese that was stolen just outside of Leicestershire over the weekend by armed robbers?
We do obviously have a lot of time dedicated to cheese-based news. No, you will be surprised to learn that the US election is wall-to-wall here as well. Yeah, we are awaiting the outcome, not quite as anxiously as the US, but not far off, I think.
You're awaiting it in a way similar, and this is called a pivot, that Manchester United are waiting for the arrival of Rúben Amorim, which means to the football roar. And let's start with Manchester United 1, Chelsea 1. We'll get to the game. I'd use the word action, but there wasn't a lot in a moment. It was all a bit of sound and fury signifying nothing. This video podcast is brought to you by Camarena, the most awarded tequila. And if you're watching this on YouTube, remember to hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming podcasts and our exclusive interviews with Premier League stars all season long. But let us first sound the bugles for the arrival of a new friend imminently. Since we last podded, Erik ten Hag has finally been put out of his quite tortuous agony, and all that sideline angst is over, probably with some relief for him. Fired last Monday after 2.5 seasons of, let's say, minor tchotchke, winning, pockmarks, stalled progress. The worst start in Premier League history this season doomed him tactical chaos, transfer market madness, really being humiliated by last summer's very public interview recruitment drive for his own replacement while he was still there. And then suddenly the pivot, belatedly, surreally, he got a contract extension But the football, always deeply fearful, reactive, quite blunt. And that did him in eventually. When you get beat by West Ham, something has got to go. United's new minority controlling owners, Ineos, moved quite differingly with him, but then decisively. Last week they pulled out 39-year-old hot new young management thing, Portuguese wonder kid Rúben Amorim of Sporting, 5 years as a head coach, but he led Sporting to the Portuguese title, ending a 19-year-old drought with his high-pressing football, tactically savvy, charismatic communicator. You can see what they're going for here, a squad builder. He's got aura, tick, 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 tick. Apparently he tried to delay his arrival to the end of the season so he could defend his Portuguese title, but was told now or never. It'll come after the international break. First league game could be December the 1st against Everton. Oh, is it as simple, Raw, as that they've tried balls, it didn't work, they're going beards this time around?
I think what's really impressive about United moving for Amorim like this is the decisiveness with which they've acted, because, like you say, they dithered with Ten Hag. The fact that it took till the end of October for him to be sacked, when really it was obvious to everybody that the juncture at which that relationship should have ended was after the FA Cup final, probably a few minutes after the FA Cup final back in May. The fact that they hawked his job around Europe, couldn't find anyone who really wanted it, so just gave him a new contract or extended his contract by a year. It's not reflected well on anybody, to be perfectly honest. Not on Manchester United, not on Ineos, not on the Glazers, not on Ten Hag. It's been fairly uncomfortable to watch him in what has always really been, obviously, the kind of final throes of his reign.
It has, humanly, right?
Yeah, it's whether you're a United fan or not, or whether, like quite a lot of people, certainly in Britain, you're kind of conditioned to find Manchester United's travails funny because they were dominant for so long. It has been slightly awkward watching it. There's like an element of cringe watching Ten Hag slump to another defeat, knowing that you're going to have another fortnight or so of, will they sack him now? But that contrasts really kind of significantly, I think, with how they went about getting Amorim. Because Amorim is the hot young property of European coaches. He's been linked with Liverpool. He's been linked with Manchester City.
All the big clubs. And West Ham.
He allegedly took a flight to London sometime earlier this year to talk to West Ham about their potential vacancy.
By the way, I never understood that. I just assumed he wanted an excuse for an all-paid trip to go and see ABBA Arrival right by West Ham.
He'd always
Stadium.
wanted to go to Madame Tussauds.
Yeah.
And he thought, this is as good an excuse as any. Look, it's fine. I will interview players in Naples. Does it mean I get to eat pizza? So it's, you use your work to fulfill your dreams. That's not a problem. No, I presume he went to West Ham just to check they were serious. Like, who are you and what do you want? But United have kind of sidestepped all that. As you say, he wanted to delay till the summer. They said, no, you either come now or you don't come at all. That's the pull that Manchester United have. They moved really quickly once Ten Hag had been sacked, which suggests to me that Dan Ashworth and the various people within the soccer hierarchy at United knew exactly who they wanted, that they'd done their due diligence, that they were making an appointment with purpose and precision. These are things that Manchester United have not done a lot of in recent years. So the fact they have now, that in itself is incredibly encouraging.
Now, you're talking about Manchester United in recent years, and I will be clear, I am old enough to remember the 5 preceding permanent managers who tried to replace Sir Alex Ferguson since 2013. And many of them came with similar pomp, similar excitement. Bonnie Renee wrote in The Guardian, the pattern in the post-Ferguson era has been for the media to tease out one particular quality to reduce the incumbent to an exaggerated cartoon quickly. It took 4 months for David Moyes to be recast as a boggle-eyed imposter, the salesman with an empty suitcase. By the end of his own time, Ten Hag looked like a quietly doomed knight errant out there, still stubbornly riding his horse backwards into battle. Louis van Gaal, amusingly insane Dutch robot. Jose Mourinho, toxic supervillain. Ralph Rangnick, unhappy driving instructor. This place, he writes in Manchester United, is an enchanted island. It will stretch you thin, twist you out of shape. And the reality is, Raw, all of those managers arrived to the sound of bugles because United has this history of great managers. Sir Matt Busby, iconically, historically, and of course Sir Alex Ferguson, who ruled dominantly for 27 years, won 13 Premier League titles in the process. All of these new managers were lauded when they arrived. Many were proud men. None lasted longer than 3 years. Now, Amorim's coveted. You mentioned who he's been linked to. He is smart. He's young. But this is his first big job, managing massive egos, massive, heavily paid players in the brightest spotlight. That English media, the tabloid media, baying to turn any little wobble into a full-blown crisis. He tries to play 3-4-3. The squad's bereft of natural wing-backs. Even the idea of making change in his second language, all of these things are bloody hard. It's one thing, I guess I'm saying, to resurrect Sporting in Portugal, which is a feat. It's an altogether another to take on that United, that giant grey gardens. Again, we've said this at Chelsea a couple of times, the Graham Potter arrival when he came. Is it like the case of a bright young regional bank manager being given the CEO job of a global multinational all over again?
There's a little bit of that I'm not sure how much of a parallel there really is between Sporting and United. And if you look at a lot of the justification for the appointment, and for the record, I think it's a really smart move.
You do.
People have said, if you look at kind of the fact that Sporting not only have won titles after a 20-year gap, they've broken that duopoly of Benfica and Porto that you have in Portugal or had in Portugal for a long time. They've sold players, they've rejigged the squad entirely. He's managed different iterations of that squad, so you have versions of the team that have Mateus Nunes in midfield, then a version with Manuel Ugarte, then a version that has neither. They've sold them on. He's been ruthless. He's trimmed. He's worked away the fat from the squad and kept the club lean. All of that stuff kind of sounds like music to the ears of Manchester United fans and executives. I think the problem is that that's what Sporting are. With all due respect, Sporting, like Benfica, like Porto, like all those big clubs in smaller leagues, their players stay for a couple of years. The good ones are sold on to someone bigger, or who pays better, and the ones who don't make it are cast off to lesser lights in the same league or to an even smaller division somewhere else, because they need to find space to allow the next crop of young talents to come through. Managing players who are at the peak of their careers, shopping in a market that is ultra luxe, that's a different challenge. It's the same one that Hiro Viana, who's the sporting director at sporting director, that he'll face at Manchester City. You're shopping in a different market. For Amorim, his coaching skill set has been established at a stepping stone club, effectively, one that he's ticked off that challenge. He's proved he can do it. But United is a level up, and it is the toughest level up. And I wrote about this last week, because I think the main thing with United is that what the fans want, and certainly what the commentariat want, all those ex-United players in the media.
Is that a word?
Commentariat, yeah.
I love what language?
I presume mainly English, but it's probably, I don't know, commentariat. It's a word. A lot of people say that to me.
It sounds like a committee within the Kremlin, but I mean, it
does a little bit. It does have that kind of Politburo quality. But if you look at your Rio Ferdinands of this world, etc., what they want the manager of Manchester United to do is to resuscitate a world that can no longer exist, because then they're inherently comparing their era, when Manchester United were the default Premier League champions, with a world in which Man City and Newcastle are backed by nation states, when Liverpool and Arsenal are thoroughly modern super clubs, and Chelsea, to be honest, look like they might be finally on the way to getting there as well, when Tottenham and Aston Villa have incomparable financial resources compared to the rest of Europe, when Brighton spent more money than any team on continental Europe last summer. Man United will win the Premier League again in the next 10 years, say 5 years probably, and it may well be Amorim who delivers it. But nobody is going to restore Manchester United to being the default champion, because that era has passed and it won't come back. So I do worry that whoever is manager of Manchester United is doomed to fail, because you're not getting a manager who's going to deliver 13 Premier League titles.
The way you describe that actually makes me think about the US women's national team and that era when we just won everything. And that era is never going to, like that whole debate about, are we going to be, number one forever again? No, but that doesn't mean that we won't win things. And adapting to that reality, this is Ineos, the new minority controlling operators. This is their massive moment. They dithered on Ten Hag, but they were bloody deliberate in this moment. Bold decision, to be honest. They paid a reported 11 million release fee for the 39-year-old, added through in another 1 million or so to shorten his 30-day notice period. And now he comes in, these twin challenges. He's got to conjure a very idea of football from that exquisite corpse of a squad that's been pieced together over several iterations of managers. And he's got to refashion the club's quite toxic culture, turn it into a winning culture, which is like turning around an oil tanker, to be candid. I mean, it's amazing. I talked about this on Monday in the Emergency podcast, which you can find, that United's strength in the Premier League period in the early days that made them the gold standard was that they became a global commercial juggernaut and created, just through deals, official airline partners, official cards, official potato snacks, official tractor engines in every quadrant. Jose Mourinho talked about this when he left. He said no manager can run this club because ultimately it's a managerial buzzsaw, because the commercial might, the commercial team are making all of the football ideas. They put brand first. That's why they kind of pull Ronaldo back a second time, because he's a global Instagram billboard. They bring in a Pogba or a Zlatan, not because they think they'll really cohere with the squad, the vision, the tactics, but for Instagram clicks. So I guess the question is, can a manager alone change anything? Ineos have this whole host of elite executives. Omar Barada, these are just names to me and probably to many of our listeners. Omar Barada, CEO. Dan Ashworth, sporting director. Jason Wilcox, technical director. Then the manager, he's got to create the vision with those guys, but then he's got to be empowered in a way none of his predecessors say they were, to execute that vision without the commercial demands kind of taking over. Is that possible without United surrendering their position as the dominant global commercial power?
Part of the problem there is that everyone has done what United did. Everyone's copied the playbook. So everyone now has an official Belarusian tractor partner, because United showcased the way. I think there is a way in which United can be run much more sensibly as a sporting entity. I don't see any reason why the commercial demands and the sporting success shouldn't run side by side, to be perfectly honest. Because ultimately, if you can turn Alejandro Garnacho into one of the best players in the Premier League, then you have a commercial star. You don't have to go and buy Zlatan Ibrahimovic at the end of his career because you want sort of immediate Instagram gratification. So I don't think that necessarily is the issue. The problem will be time. That Amorim will have to reshape that squad because, as you say, it is kind of a sort of glittery corpse of a squad. That will take a couple of years. And the problem...
Put your arm off to be a glittery corpse, Rob.
But the problem is that if you do that at Sporting and you finish third for a year or fourth for a year, then you might have the fans muttering and grumbling, but also though I think fans of those clubs are they're conditioned to understand that is the place in the pecking order, and as long as they can see young players coming through, I think that there's a degree of understanding. Plus, you know that in the summer, Benfica and Porto, they're going to sell their best players, so you almost get to start from zero every year. Whereas at United, you can have 2 years reshaping the squad. But in that 2 years, Manchester City have probably gone and bought another 3 players who may take them to an even higher level. Chelsea have gone and bought another 70 players who take them to an even higher level. You're trying to rebuild a plane whilst it's breaking the sound barrier, and that is really, really difficult.
Do not try that at home, children who are listening. So, Raw, very, very quickly to put you on the spot, because we've got an agonising 3 weeks till Amorim arrives and nature abhors a vacuum. Tabloid media in England abhor it even more than nature. They have to fill that gap with 1,000 ridiculous stories, all of them entitled "The One Thing Amorim Must Get Right or Else Risk Everything." How would you handicap, knowing what you know, his chances of succeeding where the likes of Moyes, Jose, poor Ole, oh, my heart still bleeds for him, Ralph Rangnick and Ten Hag have failed before him?
I'm tempted to say he will be a success with a little asterisk by the word success, because I'm not sure what success means to Manchester United. So I mean, is it
hedgy? If
Amorim wins the league in the next 5 years, is that success? I would say it is.
Enormous.
But I'm not sure Rio
Outlandish.
Ferdinand would agree. I think Rio Ferdinand would think that United should be winning three league titles in the next 7 years or something. And I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I don't
and by the way,
do that.
if they don't do it with attack,
Yeah.
then what's the point?
So it's the style. You've got to have that kind of sexiness. You've got to have that appeal. I think he's a smart appointment because he is a cutting-edge young coach, probably the best coach, the best candidate realistically available to Manchester United. The problem is, I also thought that about Ten Hag, because they are managers who are cut. Their CVs are very similar. I worry a little bit that Amorim might have a similar issue in terms of commanding the authority of what looks to me like a very toxic dressing room. So, yeah, I think he will do well. I think he's an upgrade. I'm not sure. It won't take Man United back to where the former players who talk about them on the TV and on the radio and on podcasts and on their own media networks. It won't. Rúben Amorim won't take United back to that, because no one can take them back to that.
Oh, Emma Hayes can. Emma Hayes could do anything. Oh, Rúben's at the wheel. I cannot wait. You'll get 3 points from Everton, Rúben. You'll have to find everything else from someplace on your own. Okay, there was a game of football for United. Not one of the most memorable, if we're being honest. It was the clash of the two most expensively constructed squads in English football history. United under interim manager Ruud van Nistelrooy. He'd only gone and coaxed 5 goals midweek in Carabao glory. GFOP at the Chris Pickens said that Ruud van Nistelrooy looked like a poor man's Ben Affleck on the sideline. I think Ben Affleck looks like a poor man's Ben Affleck at the moment, Chris. Chelsea, though, a model somewhat of how order can be coaxed out of chaos by a man who makes strategic, bold decisions. Enzo Maresca, a bit like Aston Villa's Unai Emery. Both men have transformed their clubs in, you could say, more in 6 months than Ten Hag did in his 2.5 seasons. But I digress. This was a wide open game. Two teams trying their hardest, but also very much aware of their own fallibilities. Garnacho and Marcus Rashford both lack clinicality and touch when called upon. Madueke hit the post off a corner. I think Rashford grazed the crossbar's aura at the very last moment of the half, first half from close range. Highlight was really Chelsea fans singing, "Your city is blue, your city is blue, just like London, your city is blue." I will say when United took the lead through a penalty, a Bruno penalty, the series of emotions that followed that goal. Bruno had a penalty saved in this fixture by Roberto Sanchez in this very same game. But just the reactions, Bruno overwhelmed when he celebrated. Close to tears. Ruud jumping into the air as a round of Ruud screams just cascaded down from across Old Trafford. It was as if it was 2005 and he just scored himself. It was really a lovely moment to witness.
Yeah, I think there's no question that having Van Nistelrooy kind of waiting in the wings in case Ten Hag was fired, which was always going to happen, meant that United could have a little bit of a kind of golden evening sunset type vibe in the meantime as they wait for their new manager, because there's huge amounts of affection for Van Nistelrooy at Old Trafford, as there should be. He isn't a kind of patsy coach. He has some coaching pedigree. He did well at PSV Eindhoven in his one season there. And he has the respect of the players and the adoration of the fans. And I think that gave United something to get behind. It would have been more important had they not been able to close Amorim so quickly, because you'd have needed Van Nistelrooy to see them through the rest of the season, maybe. As it is, he's going to get a few weeks, and there should be kind of a positive impact to his presence, because the fans will really want to believe that Ruud van Nistelrooy is doing a good job. They'll really want to believe that.
The sight of Ruud van Nistelrooy is like the sight of pampas grass in Northern England to a certain constituency.
Not just Northern England.
Yeah.
It's all of England.
Who decides this, by the way? At what committee meeting do they merit and demerit the different kinds of invasive grasses and decide, yep, this is the one? We'll save that for another podcast that I will not be part of. I do want to say, though, it being modern United, moments of joy can only last for like 130 seconds. United simply can't control the game. Off a corner, Caicedo had an excellent match. Swooped, just leathered the ball. I wish for 1 second in my own life I could do something as well as Caicedo hit that ball. By the way, Mudryk had the sense to jump over the ball as it smashed its way towards the net. I've got to ask you, where did that moment rank in Mudryk's top 10 moments as a Chelsea player?
Second, behind the run in his first game from which he did not score against Liverpool, which was the thing that made him the most exciting player in European football for about 3 months. It was
dangerous.
A sprint which did not result in a goal.
It's amazing. We asked over Twitter where that ranked, and everyone was like, probably, yeah, that was the consensus. It was like, it was definitely top 1 or 2. God bless you, Mikel and Mudryk. May you rise again. A result for a dogged, tenacious, slightly underwhelming Chelsea. They go fourth, brace themselves to face Arsenal in the pick of next weekend's games. For United, 2 more games for Ruud van Nistelrooy. Pampas grass aficionados is United. Still blunt. The worst start to a top-flight season in, I think it's 39 years, 2 wins in the last 9 in the league. Continues. Whole game, honestly, truly forgettable. It reminds me of the Philip Larkin line of poetry. Nothing like something happens anywhere. So on to games that do matter, that do impact the title race. We had a lot of them in ways probably we could not have foreseen. So let's start. Early Saturday doors with some tears for Piers. Newcastle 1, Arsenal 0. Going into this early Saturday game, Newcastle, they honestly felt like the team with the season floundering going into this one. They were in 12th place, 5-game winless run in the league. Arsenal's injury list, back like the Undertaker. William Saliba returning from suspension. Gabriel, his injury not as terrible as advertised. Drew and Timber both turned Gooner frowns upside down. Both fit enough to start, and Arsenal dominated early, but Newcastle scored with pretty much their first cohesive attack of the day on 12 minutes. A beautiful move of football. Anthony Gordon whipping in a savage ball, and Isak splitting the 2 centre-backs, quite stunned centre-backs to nod home thunderously. 12 goals in his last 12 Premier League home games for Isak. Raw. I am old enough to remember when Arsenal's defence was imperious, state-of-the-art. 6 Premier League games now without a clean sheet. How do you understand it?
Well, in this instance, what a cross. I mean, if you're being picky, someone should probably mark the striker. That feels like a sensible thing to suggest. Don't allow the striker who's scored in every home game for the last 2 months to stand on his own, kind of between the penalty spot and the 6-yard box. But other than that, the ball is, I think, undefendable. I don't think there's anything you can do about that. Sometimes you will concede goals, and often, if someone puts in a cross as good as that cross from Anthony Gordon, the team who have produced it will score. More broadly, I think there's something not quite firing about Arsenal. They were so miserly last year at the back. Gabriel and Saliba, I think most people agree, the best central defensive partnership in the country, in the Premier League. They don't seem quite as imperious. And I wonder if that's not to do with the defenders, but to do with the protection they have in front of them.
We'll get to that. I mean, they did, God bless them, try and react. They tried to step up the press, Arsenal. They tried to hem Newcastle back. Did become, for minutes, block City for Toon. Kept a fairly archly constructed Arsenal corner routine from delivering the goods. Newcastle harried, they niggled, they shirt pulled, they dark arts. They gave Arsenal a touch of the modern Arsenals. And for all of the ball that Arsenal had inside the Newcastle penalty area, I think they conjured just one shot on goal. It was nice to see 17-year-old Waneri come on, added an element of unpredictability, but almost the element he brought made you realise just how much you missed it. So many players ice cold, all at the same time. Trossard, Gabriel Jesus, Martinelli. You got that vaunted set-piece advantage. I don't like to say this because I found it to be one of the most magical things to witness this season. But are we starting to see enough teams have seen enough of it to try and decode and defang it? Second loss of the season for Arsenal, first with 11 players left on the field. We've got to credit Newcastle, who I think were robust, organised, dug in, ground it out. Eddie Howe bringing up the 3-year anniversary in fine and much needed style. But Raw, got to say, Arsenal suddenly feel very, very invincible. They dropped points in 5 of the last 8 games. 7-point gap already between them and top of the table. I think only Blackburn in 1994 have come back from further behind. How do you understand what is going on? This team was reinforced over the summer. We believed it would be a heavyweight title challenger. We know about that long yearning wait for glory. Gary Neville still has them winning the title, but they have a week in the crossroads. They now face Inter Milan in the Champions League and then Chelsea at the weekend. Should we be asking, is the title challenge already over?
It's too early for that, I think. It is only 10 games. The gap to City in particular will be of concern. Liverpool, I think, it's maybe more reasonable to assume that Liverpool will drop points over the course of the season. I don't think Arsenal will be overly worried about being behind, about not being able to overhaul Liverpool with 28 games to play. Although obviously it's not an ideal situation to be in. I think there's kind of three things to me. One is injury, which you have to acknowledge. Odegaard in particular, I think, was maybe more important to Arsenal than a lot of people suggested. A friend of mine actually said to me that he thought Odegaard was more important to Arsenal than Rodri is to City. And it wasn't presented like that at the time, but I think there's maybe an element of truth in that. He kind of makes everything click.
I mean, he is the quarterback. He does it. It's creativity, but also his leadership of the press. Is it without Odegaard, Arsenal is just a top 4 team, not title champions?
It does look a little bit like that. And I think one of the issues they've got is a lot of their transfer business, especially in midfield, hasn't been particularly successful, to be perfectly honest. The players who were meant to be Odegaard's understudies, Kai Havertz plays up front. Leandro Trossard is filling in for Odegaard, but is probably better used wide. I think that's maybe something that we can agree. Emile Smith-Rowe now plays for Fulham, and Fabio Vieira, who was £35 million, $50 million worth of footballer, is back on loan at FC Porto, having barely featured for Arsenal really since he signed for them. That is kind of where the problem is, that you do get injuries, and it is a massive blow to lose one of your 2 best players so early in the season for such a long period of time. But if you want to win titles, you need to have deputies. You need to have deputies who can come in and fill in and minimise the gap. And it looked a lot like Arsenal just don't. But that's actually married to an extent with what seems to me to be Arteta, I think, might have gone a little bit too far on the defences win championships line. He's lost a little bit of the verve that marked his early Arsenal teams. They are more physically imposing, they're more solid, they're more obdurate, their emphasis is more on the defensive. And it makes me think that in games like Saturdays, where you kind of need to cut loose a little bit, and if you've conceded early, you need to find that gear where you just say, do you know what, we're going to throw everything at this. Arsenal seem to really struggle with doing that, and I think that might be an issue that makes them fall short.
All I know is that when the therapy dog is going to be very, very, very much in demand in our Arsenal training ground this week. And it got worse for Arsenal fans this morning. Shock news that Edu Gaspar, the former Arsenal title winner as a player turned sporting director, mastermind who oversaw the club's reformation from a squad bloated by Deadwood on big wages to this young, modern title-challenging manifestation. He's a man who smiled in photos alongside the likes of Odegaard, Ben White, Gabriel Jesus, Declan Rice, amongst others when they arrived. Really very much the other hand clapping in partnership with Mikel Arteta, almost built the processes to bring them to where they are. I interviewed him this August. You can find it on our YouTube. He's a brilliant human being. He announced this morning that he will be leaving the club. He said to have been in talks with the Marinakis Group. You'll remember him, listeners. He's the big Greek shipping tycoon who is reported to have offered triple the wages and the position of CEO, which Edu craved at Arsenal. He could now lead the Nottingham Forest Group's recruitment. They also own Olympiacos, as well as the Portuguese side of Rio Ave. Raw, how much we read into this? Is it a bit like Manchester City where cheeky Big Erestein is poised to step down as director of football? How much will Edu's departure impact this season's everything?
Well, it shouldn't impact this season particularly because the transfer business is done for the season. It's kind of in the hands of the coaches now. It might impact planning ahead of next season, I suppose, as that will be underway already. It's a bit of a blow to Arsenal's prestige, I suppose, because if he, as expected, goes to Nottingham Forest, it looks an awful lot like he's traded in what we would assume to be a bigger club for a smaller one, even if that's for pay increased responsibility, whatever reason it is that people move jobs, and ultimately people are allowed to move jobs. But the big difference with the Begiristain thing, I think it's really hard to look at Edu's tenure as Arsenal sporting director and say, oh, well, that's job done then, because they've still not won a trophy. It's not like he's completely reshaped the squad to the point where it's, it is set for the next few years. It feels like he's leaving it as a work in progress, and I think it's quite hard to spin that as a positive sign for Arsenal. Why does an executive who has a link to the club, he played for Arsenal, he has a kind of emotional bond to Arsenal, why would you want to to put a stop to that prematurely, all right, maybe you're being paid more money and you're being given a bigger title by the Marinakis group. But I'm guessing Edu's not, he's probably not on the poverty line. I suspect he's quite well paid at Arsenal. And it does feel like, Arsenal are in the Champions League. They are competing for major honours in a way that Forest aren't. It does seem a little bit like, a kind of blow to the club's status, I suppose.
I think more to come, much more to come on that story which broke this morning. It may just boil down to a simple boyhood fascination with the shipping industry.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't have that? We've all been fascinated by Greek shipping tycoons.
Yeah, Hemingway, the old man and the sea. Ever since then, I've wanted to run Nottingham Forest. Arsenal fans will then brace to watch Manchester City eviscerate all comers, turn it into the single worst weekend ever. But it was not to be, because one of the bigger shocks in the sporting world, that involves fruit. Bournemouth 2, Manchester City 1. Truly an astonishing outcome. Especially because going in, honestly, it felt like we were laughing about it on Friday. This game should have been an email. Bournemouth had never beaten Manchester City. I think 20 previous league meetings, which is a record in English football at any level. 0 Premier League points gleaned. Even though City had been dumped out of the Carabao Cup by Spurs midweek, Pep was moaning about injuries going into this. It felt like a bluff because there have been magical resurrections of the walking wounded. Kyle Walker, Ake, Gvardiol, Akanji, even KDB, Doku and Savinho were on the bench yet. Iraola, credit that man, had his war cherries, just act like they had no respect for the league leaders, no fear, charge at his opponents from the off, 9 minutes. Kirkes called the taxi for Phil Foden, whipped in a ball, and the quite excellent, sizzling and rather coveted Semenyo controlled, span round Gvardiol and stunningly shot home. Protod torpedo down the Death Star ventilation duct, it felt like in that moment. Pep Guardiola's team, I mean, very odd season. Top, yeah, but they're yet to really properly convince. They conceded 4 goals in the first 15 minutes of games this season, which is a very, very odd tick. It's a funny bit to do. I think only Ipswich and spiralling West Ham have conceded more in that time. Be honest, when that ball went in, you're like, okay, seen this before. This is going to end 4-1, 5-1 City.
Yeah, it kind of feels like City are giving people a head start to an extent, isn't it? It's a bit like, all right, we'll beat you then if you're going to insist on playing football against us and try and score goals and stuff, right? We'll just kind of swat you aside. It's very hard when a team takes the lead against Manchester City to assume that it's anything other than a deliberate feint from Pep Guardiola's team to kind of prove that they can win football matches however they want. I remember once when I was a younger man playing Championship Manager, the management simulator that came before Football Manager, and I won the league so many times with Barcelona, I think, that I decided to build an entirely Argentinian team and only play Argentinian players, just because that was the only way of creating a challenge for myself.
Mischief night.
It kind of feels a bit like Guardiola's been like, right, okay, we've won the league 6 times out of 7. Why don't we see if we can do it if we concede first in every game?
It's like Larry Bird just shooting left-handed all game.
Yeah. Just give him a goal, see what happens.
Yeah, but City did not have a single shot on target in that first half. I gotta say, watching Bernardo Silva seems slow in this game. Gundogan alongside him seems slow in this game. Semenyo continued to almost personally taunt Kyle Walker, gave him that classic footballing cliche, twisted blood. Half-time, City and Liverpool were both losing. Pep and Slot, I mean, just side by side in double cut. It was like, I think someone asked, is there a collective noun for stress balls? On Twitter, you guys decided it was called a Rog, which thanks for nothing, dear listeners. Bournemouth only added to the madness. Hungarian Kirkes again flayed the flank, flinging across, into which the ever-confidence growing Dominic Solanke replacement, Evan Nielsen, flung himself, first time angled the ball past a quite stupefied Ederson, left even Noel Gallagher shaking his head in the crowd. Yes, there was a late Gvardiol header, thunderous strike on the same. It was 82nd minute, was it? Quite an incredible statistic last week came out that he has had more touches in the final third, Gvardiol, than any other player from any other Premier League club. That is peak Pep. Late on, though, Haaland had the ball stuck under his feet, hit the goalkeeper, the quite sprightly Travers, and the post from close range like a malfunctioning droid. And that's the way City's club record of 32 Premier League games unbeaten comes to an end. Guardiola blamed a, quote, lack of intensity from his injury ground downside, talked about how his players couldn't, quote, handle the onslaught from Bournemouth. How do you decode this, Raw? Is it a warning shot that a Rodri-less City are not immortal, and that kind of eternal schedule over the last couple of seasons, all that winning has finally come home to roost for a quite exhausted squad? Or is this just that Manchester City trope that we see every season, that blip that we think, oh, they're terrible now, but it's not a feature? A bit like losing to Wolves last season, and they're just going to rip off a 28-game winning run, nothing to see here.
You can't rule out that that's exactly what it is. This is the time of the season that City do tend to be a little bit delicate, shall we say. That's probably the best way of putting it, that they will lose to Brentford at home or lose at Molineux, or in this case, lose to a team that they'd never lost to before in their history. We've got used to seeing City maybe, have a misstep around the time of Bonfire Night. Maybe they just love fireworks and they're all looking forward to it. It's hard to say. But there's two things I think that are worth thinking about with this one. One is City haven't won a game by more than one goal since, I think, August or maybe very early September. Most of their wins have been by a single goal. You think back to the very narrow win against Wolves. They're not... It's not that they're producing, typical Man City dominant performances for the most part, and then having the occasional slip up. They're kind of winning games by the skin of their teeth. That is something that City haven't done previously. It's now almost a third of the way through the season, and they haven't been that impressive. That is, I think, an okay thing to say and to think. And the other thing is the injuries, which the actual amount of injuries City have is being completely overblown. You have De Bruyne, who's now on his way back, Grealish, Rodri, Oscar Bob, who's not really a key player in that team. No one would have said, City's title bid's really
dashed,
really under threat because Oscar Bob can't play. Oscar Bob wouldn't have been playing anyway. That's no disrespect to him. You've had little niggles to people like Doku and Savinho, and now Guardiola after the Bournemouth game said Stones and Ruben Diaz will probably be absent till the international break. We'll have to wait and see if that's true. Rodri's the big one. Again, you should really be able to cope with an injury to one player. That shouldn't be an excuse, even if it is the Ballon d'Or, the key component of your side. It's a blow, but City can't claim that they don't have the resources to replace him. I think the problem might be a combination of those injuries and the size of City's squad, because it's not very big. There's a lot of young players who come in as soon as they have a couple of injuries, and although those young players are all incredibly gifted, there's a difference between being an incredibly talented young player and winning every single football match that you play in. And I just wonder whether, as you say, with the fatigue of the last couple of years, with the schedule that they have this season and have had for the last two seasons, with a small squad, with a few more early season injuries than you'd normally anticipate, maybe that puts a little bit of a physical burden on them, which certainly doesn't mean it's impossible they'll win the league. I still think they'll win the title, but does give other teams a chance. Yeah,
won't get fooled again, Raw. Although we will find out, because City have, well done Champions League writers, they have Rúben Amorim Sporting in the Champions League this week, then Brighton away, Spurs home, Liverpool away, with Pep muttering about NBA-style load management. We will find out. Oh yes, we will find out. I do want to credit Bournemouth for a second, because I do adore them. They are such a fascinating model of a club. Under American ownership, Bill Foley of your Las Vegas Golden Knights, trying every single way he can to find competitive edges in recruitment and scouting when his commercial heft in that tiny little stadium, in that very odd, different little uncommercial town on the south coast is very hard to come by. Adoni Iraola, the manager, huge Chicago Bears fan, I should add, is really burnishing his reputation week on week. Such a courageous side. Bournemouth posted post-game, everyone, Bournemouth going to get smashed in the next 3 games. Us, Arsenal, 3 points. Villa, 1 point. Man City, 3 points. Enjoy these days. I honestly thought Bournemouth should have got 4 points in this one. If Iraola had talked about City post-game quite patronisingly and just say, Pep is so good. I'm actually seeing my friend, Tyler Adams. He came on 24 minutes to shut the game out. Looked like he's barely been out, which I hope he continues to do. He's coming on next week. Send us your questions at meninblazers@gmail.com. And up you Bournemouth Golden War Cherries. I mentioned them earlier, Raw. You're Liverpool. At the same time as City went down, Liverpool 2, Brighton 1. Two teams meeting for the second time this week. Liverpool had edged the Carabao Clash on the road, courtesy of some Gakpo magic 3-2. You wouldn't have known it, though, for that first half performance. Liverpool didn't really show up. Insipid. Brighton truly game, took the lead. 14th minute, Matoma carved open the flank. Danny Welbeck flicked on intelligently. And Turkish wonder, Ferdi Kadıoğlu arrowed home his first Premier League goal. And it could have been 3-0, honestly, by half-time. Liverpool, their midfield, including ex-Brighton old boy McAllister, totally overmatched. But I don't know what happened at half-time, Raw. Arne Slot talked about just the intensity. I do actually think this is his underrated stealth compared to Klopp. Klopp, for all this pomp and noise and the spectacle, he wasn't really a plan B guy, was he? I imagine most of the time in the half-time locker room, he was just like pulling my finger, lighting his farts and beating his chest like a German Matthew McConaughey in Wolf of Wall Street, just hugging guys madly. What did Arne Slot do here at half-time, Raw? Because it worked.
He told them not to do what they did against Nottingham Forest, which admittedly, in hindsight, given that Forest are now Champions League contenders, not that bad a result. But I think he maybe snapped them out of the funk that they had got themselves in. Because as you say, Liverpool totally outplayed in that first half. Brighton looked really dangerous. Liverpool disjointed, open, easy to play through, really vulnerable. I think the advantage that Slot has, they basically have two weapons in their arsenal, and neither of those weapons is quite as deadly as the one they had under Klopp. But under Klopp, they only had one. If Liverpool were on it under Jurgen Klopp, they won. That was what happened. No one could live with them. That if they were at their sort of biting, energetic, industrious best, they beat you eventually. Under Slot, I think there is a bit more awareness of the squad within the squad that they don't need to be running around like maniacs the whole time to win a football match. But if they need to run around like maniacs, they can and they will. And that's what Slot said. He said that it wasn't about kind of tactics off the ball. It was, I think the quote was, you run and then you run some more. And that's something that those Liverpool players, this is still Klopp's squad, they understand how to do it. And they did. They found a way to ratchet up the intensity in that second half. And as much as they could have been 3-0 down at half time, they could easily have won that second half by 3 or 4.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it was about intensity. It was about energy. I love that. Bet your Slot even trains them in running around like a maniac. He's that kind of guy. Like even the maniac nature of this team is like planful and trained. Joe Gomez came on for the injured Konate. I thought he brought some real fight. Gakpo became sharper. He's coming on this week. I can't wait to speak to that man. One of his crosses slapped in from the flank, misread by Darwin with an attempted header. It flat-footed the keeper and nestled into the corner of net. At Max Arcuso wants to know, did Darwin dummy his header miss for Gakpo's goal on purpose? Because it would be the most Darwin thing possible to miss the ball so badly that it goes in, yet he knows that. Raw. It's a dangerous thing to put yourself in Darwin's head, but please go for it.
I think the thing with Darwin is don't assume there are any thoughts. It's all instinct all of the time, but it shows that even within that kind of empty shell, there is a moral core, because the first thing he did was kind of acknowledge that it was Cody Gakpo's goal.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, how do you know something that's unfathomable? Knowing Darwin is a bit like asking yourself, what is God like? I mean, it's incomprehensible. The fact that it's not fully understood just means there's wisdom, there's faith, there's hope, there's love, there's rediscovery. But whatever, within 3 minutes, routine trademark superhero level magic from Mo Salah just turned Anfield into a single cacophonous roar. God, he moves ahead of Robbie Fowler. I think he's 8th now all-time in the Premier League, all-time goal-scoring chart. And just like that, Liverpool go back top. Arne Slot becomes the first Liverpool manager in that team's illustrious history to win 8 of his first 10 top-flight league games. Are we still at a stage where we've got to hold back the praise and say we need to see more? Can't judge on this small body of work. Let's remember what happened to Ange Postecoglou after his first 10 games of the season last year. Or can we start to give Arne Slot some fist bumps Jurgen Klopp style?
With kind of reservations, yes. So the first allegation against Slots Liverpool before this run of games was they'd not played anyone decent because they'd only had to face Manchester United of the kind of established elite. They've now played several decent teams, Chelsea, Arsenal, Brighton, and not lost to any of them. That deserves praise. I think against both Chelsea and Brighton, they've shown an ability to win when not playing especially well, which generally is a positive thing, although there is a flip side to the argument, and it says that eventually if you don't start playing well, you'll get caught out. They seem to have more than one way to win, which is a pretty sort of encouraging sign as well. I would be surprised now if there was a colossal drop-off in terms of Slot being exposed as some sort of fraud. He seems to have found a way to turn that team into something a little bit different to what was there before, whilst harnessing a lot of the kind of qualities and strengths that Klopp had given Liverpool. I don't know whether that will end up with them being long-term title contenders this season. I still think they're quite light in midfield in particular in terms of numbers, and I think if they had injuries in the way that City and Arsenal do, they would have problems, although they would point out they are missing their first choice goalkeeper, and that's not ideal, as well as probably their first choice number 9 in Diogo Jota. All Slot can do really is answer the questions that are put to him, and the most recent question was, you've not played anyone especially good. Now they have, and they're top.
2 other games, and Spurs fans, you deserve happiness too. You do. Tottenham 4, Aston Villa 1. A clash between 2 high-line obsessed outfits. Consistently inconsistent Spurs entered with the dankness of loss at Crystal Palace last weekend, washed away by the empty calories of that Carabao Cup victory against Manchester City, making Ange's boast that I always win trophies in my second season, mate, ring so bloody true. This game now was all about that desperate search for consistency. They'd lost 9 of the last 16 league games, facing up to an Aston Villa side who in many ways top of the Champions League currently. The tactical canniness of Unai Emery, a team living the life that Spurs fans believe should be theirs almost by right. It didn't start well. Off a corner, Morgan Rogers bodied Vicario, treated the nervy keeper a bit like Jason Kelsey, treats Penn State idiot cell phones. 20 set-piece goals conceded now under Ange Postecoglou. Raw, Spurs and set-pieces, a masochistic love story.
It's one of those things that's become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you could see this against Villa, that Villa have decided Guglielmo Vicario doesn't like having players stood near him from corners, so they spent most of their time trying to make sure there were loads of players stood near Vicario at corners. And ultimately, I think if teams have a sense that the opponent has a weak spot, eventually they push it so much and they prod it so much, it becomes a weak spot, and that's what's happened with Spurs and set pieces.
I mean, it's shades of De Gea early, but he learned, he evolved, and Spurs almost seem resistant to change, because this is the 12th time, an incredible statistic, that Spurs have conceded the opening goal of a home game, the most of any team this year. And it did feel dark at half-time. It did, Spurs fans. You may have written this out of your being, but Villa threatened every Cobra strike on the break, and there was a lot of agony at half-time, like same old crap Spurs variety, that kind of stuff. But second half, this was honestly the shock of the weekend for me, even more than Bournemouth. Captured almost by the comment on Insta from GFOP at Lug Junkie, who posted, "What happened next was all the sweeter, especially after listening to the commentators crap on Spurs while saying Unai Emery's got the perfect game plan." Because Ange the idealist, Ange the too stubborn to change man, Ange, for me, he did outcoach Unai Emery here, made Spurs steelier. First off, going with Sarr over the brittle creativity of James Maddison, but then making substitution after substitution to deliver in key moments. First off, Sonny, setting up just a wicked ball for Brennan Johnson to score for the first time in 5 games. And how did he react? He took off Sonny. A stunning moment. It was like Lisa Simpson saying you could almost see the second where his heart broke, and everyone was like, "What are you doing, Ange?" But again, Ange knew what he was doing. And Spurs' next great move, Davis stealing the ball from Ollie Watkins, delicious slip pass from Kulusevski, and Solanke who struggled for confidence at times since he moved to Spurs, swept in, stone cold finish over Emi Martinez, which honestly should count double. 4 minutes later, did it again, finished off another electric move. I think it was Sarr stealing from Pau Torres, Richarlison, just on. God bless you, Richie, tweaking his poor hammy in the process. Rolled the ball to Solanke. And even James Maddison trotted on and dispatched a cameo late skill-soaked free kick. John McGinn said the London stadium was louder than any stadium he'd ever been in. What a turnaround, Raw. I think it's the ninth time Big Ange has come from behind at home. Tottenham do it again. Honestly, for me, I've talked about this a lot. Football, the greatest lesson it teaches us is that we know nothing. And at half-time, how we laughed. We did. That old Spurs trope seemed to come back to haunt Big Ange. But again, his big, bold second-half decision-making changed everything, delivered a buccaneering memory. This could be said to be a signature win. So let me ask you this, Raw. On behalf of the thousands of Spurs fans who watch this show, why are Spurs like watching a different team? They're like a mystery gift grab bag. You have to pull your hand in and pull something out. It could be a turd. It could be just a block of goal, but you got zero idea, and it's not entirely clear Ange does either.
I think it's probably a mixture, isn't it, between the fact that the players are elite, but not the absolute kind of world-beating, top-of-the-class, supreme players, because of, kind of Spurs' economic situation. But also, it's because the way that Ange plays needs everything to click. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't really work and it all looks a bit disjointed and they probably lose to Crystal Palace. But as soon as it does click, they're actually irresistible. What I would say is in this game, they were helped a little bit by Villa. First of all, it didn't really feel like a 4-1 to me. It didn't feel like that was a fair reflection of the balance of power between these two teams. It was a lot tighter than that. Three of the goals came in the last 15 minutes. And the other is that Villa did kind of play into Spurs' hands a little bit by crumbling. So I wouldn't necessarily say that Spurs are, on the basis of this game, this win, miles clear of Aston Villa. Aston Villa, of course, in the Champions League. But it does show that when things go right with Spurs, when they're on it, they're a real force.
They are now seventh, just 2 points behind Aston Villa and the Arsenal. And not to go too Kaiser Soze on your ass. I think the greatest trick the Spurs ever pulled was convincing Aston Villa they didn't exist. For Villa, who looked a little bit heavy-legged, they face Liverpool and Chelsea in 2 of their next 3. Joy of the season, Nottingham Forest 3, West Ham 1, Forest living a start to this campaign. Honestly, cut of pure, undistilled fan streams. The third goal, if you've not seen it from the weekend, just a giddy blast from the quite delirious Aina. My favourite strike of the weekend. He did this great post-game interview where they asked him what he thought. He just goes, I was knackered, so I might as well hit it. Chris Wood, 4th straight game with the goal, like a giant Kiwi movable backboard. We wondered if there was an American example of a journeyman like Chris Wood becoming unstoppable. GFOP at LSFR14 told us, not since they outlawed steroids in baseball. Forest game, it's built on their defence, the second best in the league, conceded just 7 times. They are now in 3rd place, highest they've been this late in the season since 1998. Nuno gives me great joy. Derided as a Spurs manager, he is risen, as are the club. Just an immense feat for a team, Raw, who survived in the Premier League only on the final day last season.
It's been an astonishing turnaround, and partly the credit for that goes to Nuno, who we know Nuno's really good at getting teams to finish 7th in the Premier League. He did it with Wolves constantly, and he would have done it with Spurs if he'd been given the chance. That Spurs team would have finished 7th. It's just that for some teams, finishing 7th is not much of a success. But the thing that's really kind of unusual to me at Forest, the recruitment, which for so long was utterly chaotic, kind of a forerunner of Chelsea, just signing whoever they could think of. They've got a really well-balanced, well-crafted, really flexible squad, and they're deep. They have numbers, they've got quality in depth. I don't think Forest will finish in the Champions League places. I don't think they'll challenge for the title. But Forest shouldn't be taken lightly. They won't fall away spectacularly. They've got a manager who knows what he's doing, who can make them difficult to beat, and they've got players who can stand up to everybody but probably the very best.
God bless. West Ham living hello darkness, my old friend vibes. 1 shot on goal, 14th place for a team who spent 158 million over the summer and still playing formless, shapeless slop. Julian Lopetegui, so tactically savvy in his brief cameo at Wolves, seems bereft. Dortmund's former manager Edin Terzic said to be floating around waiting in the wings. Raw, is it just hard to be the man to follow the Moyes?
It's hard to be the man to follow the Moyes when you are basically
back.
a Spanish version of David Moyes, except perhaps not quite as good at getting the best out of that squad. That is what Lopetegui is. There's a whole mismatch between what West Ham fans want and what the board went for. Lopetegui, I think, is an okay manager. I don't think he's a bad manager, but I'm not sure he's a great manager. But crucially, he wasn't the sort of manager that West Ham fans wanted to see replace Moyes. They wanted someone who would play more expansive football. They wanted an Oliver Glasner, or even someone like Emery, who has that kind of in his locker. Whereas Lopetegui is quite cautious and defensive, and the fans didn't like that.
Ten Hag rewashing up at West Ham.
Eric Ten Hag, I think, would do a really good job at West Ham.
He is the kind of guy that just love it at the irons. To get 2 tattoo sleeves, it'd be in a wink of an eye, and just be like, oh, now I'm truly home. In other games, Wolves 2, Crystal Palace 2. Wolves remain one of 2 winless teams. They've got only themselves to blame this weekend, continuing a late lead. Both Palace goals scored from set pieces to boot. A team that fired their set piece coach Wolves last month. Don't worry though, lads. You may have just 1 win in your past 20 league games. 8 points, I think, from the last 60 available. But you got Everton next. Ipswich 1. Leicester 1, agony again for Ipswich, who cannot catch a break. Jordan Ayew's 94th minute goal, magical team affair in which Jamie Vardy seemed to just suddenly turn into bloody David Silva before our very eyes, and Leicester a point. Kieran McKenna, Ipswich manager, continued to Monty Python the bright side of life. It's 10 games we haven't won, but 5 from which we got a result. Probably 8 we competed in. ... Tottenham, Manchester United, Nottingham Forest next. Fulham host Brentford on Monday afternoon, which leaves us with the entirely foreseeable but immensely sloppy darkness that was Southampton 1, Everton 0. I knew this was going to happen. If you get our newsletter, I wrote about this Friday. I wrote that, yes, we might be unbeaten in our last 5 Premier League games, but just look at Southampton's record. Bottom of the table, 1 point off 9 games, 0 clean sheets, winless in their last 22 top flight games. Do you catch my drift? Everton fans know all too well our team is at its very core world football's most selfless make-a-wish charity. Prepare for darkness. And so it came to be. There's actually a member of our social team, an amazing man called Ali Iverson, who's proper Southampton, and I asked him on Friday how he felt about the game, and he said that he was braced for an inevitable 99th minute Everton equaliser, and I just impulsively, without thinking about it, I just blurted, Raw, you've probably never felt like this, but I just blurted out, I will bite your arm off for a 1-1 draw against your crappy team. Do you even mildly relate emotionally to what I just went through in that moment?
Anybody who supports a football team should be of the view that a 1-1 draw away from home against anybody is quite a good result. And if you don't think it's quite a good result, you're doing football wrong.
Oh, mate, I felt low even as I said it, but it just came out so naturally. I'm like, my God, I would take that now because I can glimpse the future like Cassandra and I see my own death in the marketplace. And that's what happened. It was a grim game, honestly, that tested the theory that both teams can't lose a game of football. 85th minute, incredible sequence. Beto, God bless Beto. My youngest,
Beto.
My son is obsessed with him. He's got a Beto jersey. Obsessed with Beto, and I so want him to do well, hit the bar. He did play well. What did he? I mean, he tries. God bless. He's about as good as football as me, I think. But he tries so much harder. You won't be saying that
when he scores his double in the Merseyside derby, Rog. Come on.
Oh my God, I'll be bronzing. I will be smelting the statue. I adore it. Arguably our most kind of fight-filled, intense, hungry. It cares so bloody much. Anyway, hit the bloody bar of a thunderous header. Southampton, you could see it happening as it unfolded. Only went down the field. Adam Armstrong, a player who had delivered, let's just say, a masterclass in failing to grasp even basic concepts of geometry. suddenly swept the ball home. First Premier League goal of the season for him. Of course, he scores against us. I want to say I'm happy for Southampton fans. Back in the top flight. First win. By the way, just one win less than we do. That's when you realise that being an Everton fan is just, it's like falling in love with Peanut the Squirrel. Rip Peanut the Squirrel. God bless you. I don't know how you see us, but I do think there's going to be an interesting decision point in terms of Sean Dyche's truly, utterly reactive, unambitious, blunt, fear-filled football and his future. I mean, cool. Eric Ten Hag in, Ro.
Yeah, I think with the new ownership coming in, that there will be a natural urge to kind of analyse where everybody stands vis-a-vis their continued employment. I think the thing with Dyche is, he can keep you safe. He can keep Everton in the Premier League to move into the new stadium as a Premier League team. So maybe you stick with him, because the relegation battle, to me, looks like it will have Everton just above it this season. And look, there's 3 points to come in the Merseyside derby early in December. So let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Don't bait me. Don't patronise me. Do not raise false hope. Come on, you new owners. Bring in Daniel De Rossi. Did so well for Roma. God, let's end this darkness, Raw, by getting to a reader's letter to close. A letter from Jules Tomlin of Chicago, Illinois, greatest city in the world. Writes, Rog and Rory, thanks for all you do. You two live and love football so much. I want to know, does football impact or pierce your dream life? Do you have dreams? Do you have football dreams? Do you even remember your dreams? If you have them, I'll hang up and listen. Jules, I do love this question so bloody much. I once asked the then Italian team manager, Cesare Prandelli, who's a lovely man, before his side played that great Spanish football team in a 2013 Confederations final, if he had any chance to sleep at all, because he was so stressed about all that was to come tactically. And whether he even dreamed about Spain in his sleep. And he said, I actually train my team to have positive dreams only, which I just love. The idea you can force yourself to dream positively. Raw, are you a dreamer of football dreams, or do you have a more healthy inner life than I do?
No, I don't. I'm not a great one for remembering my dreams, but I do have dreams. And I think, did you message me to say that we were going to talk about this?
I know you said this is like a bit deep.
It's too deep for me. It's verging on therapy. I'm not quite comfortable with it as a Yorkshireman. I think when I dream about football, I tend to be dreaming about something else that's stressing me out. And then it somehow morphs into a football match that represents the problem that I'm getting stressed out about in my dream.
What, you just dreaming about job stuff, and then Andy Carroll just lollips into the dream. And it's like, don't worry, Raw.
Kids stuff, or whatever it might be. If my son's having a tough time at school or whatever, and you're sort of dreaming about something to do with that.
And then Darwin Núñez just crops up.
It turns out that there's a football match, and if you win the football match, the problem is solved. That's the role I think football plays in my dreams, which, when I say it out loud, sounds deeply weird and quite troubling.
God, Freudian therapists who are listening, can you please email us, meninblazers@gmail.com? What does that actually mean? That football crops up as just these stakes that decide the future of many of Rory's angst-filled realities. I actually dream very, very literal dreams. My wife always laughs. Whatever I'm stressing out about or is really annoying me, she'll ask me what I dreamed of, and I do remember most of them. I'll describe it. And she'll just be like, that one needs a lot of interpretation. I wonder what that one could mean. Talked about this with Becky Sauerbrunn this week, ahead of having her on to do it live after a US game. She played 200 plus games for the US and never scored. And I did actually dream of her taking a free kick, a total banger, curling it into the top right corner, which was really lovely. But this week, Raw, straight up, I crap you not, my dream was of Greg Berhalter, former US men's national team manager, coming into our offices at the Men in Blazers Media Network and just in our boardroom, just sitting down and in quite harrowing detail, talk about the pain, how he felt screwed out of his job. He asked if he could work with us, in the boardroom. It really broke my heart. I felt terrible. And I just woke up and I told my wife I felt so sorry for him. Cue my wife's voice. What could that possibly mean, bro?
I think it means that you blame yourself for Greg Berhalter's demise as US men's national team coach.
I think it actually means Greg Berhalter to Everton.
Want to offer him a job?
Yep, Greg Berhalter to Everton. Here we go. God bless. Think about that one and enter that one into your dream life, dear listeners. All doubt. And it's probably for the best that I say that. This is it for this week. We'll be back with European Nights tomorrow. We got Dominic Solanke dropping on YouTube this week. Raw, I'm off to New Orleans this weekend. Have you ever been there?
I've not, no.
Oh,
always wanted to go.
Oh, let's eat up a storm. But we will both be back next week. Huge love to you, Raw, you Crown Prince of Harrogate.
It's been a pleasure.
And this is Rog, sending Raw back to his, what was the tree? A palm frond.
Pampas grass.
Yeah,
I don't have any pampas grass.
I can give you mine. I'm going to pull it out right now. This is Rog sending the big love. Let's not take a second of watching football together for granted. And courage.